Look, I know you all voted for the new Scary Stories video over a Best of April video, but I'm super busy at home lately and haven't had time to do some new stories yet. Plus, no one watches my videos on Fridays, so today you're gonna take this Best of April video and you're gonna like it. Pretty please? For real though, this is a set of stories that I really enjoyed last month. It doesn't technically mean I find them extra believable. They're simply stories I found the most creepy and or fun. However, the ones that are more believable usually are the most fun to me. Enjoy, and be sure to send me your scary stories for my next episode at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear some stories from Scotland or Iceland. Also, we're due for another compilation episode. Comment below what topic you want to see featuring a bunch of old stories that match that topic. Oh, and we just launched another new podcast about the most haunted locations all over the world. It's called Destination Terror, and it's hosted by Carmen Carrion. Check the links in the description and listen and rate the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to help us grow. Thank you. Now, let's begin. My 7th birthday. From Anonymous. I'm from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, really right next to Lake Superior. You could probably guess back in 1991 there really wasn't much crime there. My parents, as well as other parents, always let their children wander either alone or in groups. I was born in June, and so every summer my birthdays were always outside, at the beach, or barbecue-type parties that usually lasted all day. That year, my 7th birthday was no different from the others. That was the year we decided we'd go to the next town over, just a couple miles away, to a place called Alqual Recreation Area. It was off the highway a bit with an elementary school on the same property. It's a big place. There were lots of trees to climb, trails to walk, and a big pavilion you could use for parties. Lots of playground equipment too, that was older, but was still considered safe to use and fun. There was a small paved kind of wide bike path that wound around the whole place. It was a favorite place to go for sure. While my parents were setting up at the pavilion, some family were just starting to arrive. I could tell my brother was getting tired of playing with his little sister, so I asked my mom if it was alright if I just sort of walked down the bike path a ways, just a bit over the hill. Sure, just stay close where we can see you. I remember her saying that to me. Okay. And that was it. I left my brother to hang with the cousins while I walked off on my own a bit. It was such a sunny, bright afternoon. There really was no darkness on the bike path. But I didn't see the white pickup truck parked on the bike path until I'd actually got to the bottom of the hill, out of my mom's sight. Why I kept walking towards it, I have no idea. I remember seeing that truck, an older type of truck, maybe a 60s style with a cap over the truck bed. I could see it over the roof of the truck as I was walking towards the front of it. There was a man I could see sitting on the bench that the truck was pulled up alongside. He looked like Santa to me, and he was whittling a piece of wood. I got pretty close and was going to turn around when I was surprised by a little girl. "Hi." She popped out from behind the truck and practically screamed it at me. The old man didn't even look up. I looked at him, and he just kept whittling. This little girl was so enthusiastic, and she was smiling. Now, this is a small town. Everyone looks fairly familiar, but I'd never seen this truck, nor these two people before. Still, I smiled back and said hi. I remember we had some unmemorable kid talk when she quickly said, "Oh, hey, want to see something great?" I answered, "Sure." The girl very excitedly started to tell me the grandfather, who was the whittler on the bench, had built her and her brother a little space in the back of the truck. She wanted me to see it. I was a pretty shy kid that got picked on a lot, and I think I was so desperate for a friend, I didn't even think about how I've never seen them before, or any other dangers or red flags. 7-year-old me was just happy to have a possible new friend. Maybe her family just moved there, and this would be my chance to have a friend this summer. She took me around the back of the truck, where the tailgate and the window to the cab were already open. We both climbed in. I went as far back on my hands and knees as I could in front of her. Somehow, she had closed the tailgate and the window in one motion. I don't even know how she could have done this. She was so small and only seemed maybe a little bit older than me. I just stupidly shrugged it off. There was a bucket with crayons and pencils and a tiny table and a tiny set of chairs. I, for whatever reason, expected more. I said something along the lines of, "Oh, okay, this looks nice. Well, my mom is going to be looking for me, so I think I should get going." Then I started to reach for... Wait, I didn't know how to open this from the inside. The girl went from happy to a weird, creepy smile. She suddenly didn't look like a little girl anymore. I started to feel that uh-oh feeling you have when you know you screwed up. I tried to put my hands on the window of the truck topper, and every time I did this, the girl would laugh a really creepy laugh, swatting my hands away. I was really crying at this point, and I started to bang on a small side window on the topper to get the old man's attention. At that point, as the girl's laughing is growing, along with my panic, the old man proceeds to get up and put the stick in his pocket. I thought, great, he's going to get me out. But he didn't. He didn't go towards the back of the truck at all. He started walking around the front of it. I began to scream at the top of my lungs. This girl just kept laughing. I still remember her face as she laughed at me, telling me I could not leave. As I was sitting there gasping now and looking around frantically, I could hear my mom's voice. I jumped around the girl and quickly banged and screamed as loud as I could on the side of the topper. I could see my mother at the front of the truck talking to the man who didn't seem like he cared about much when she heard me. Thank goodness she did. She immediately walked around the back, letting me out of the truck. I jumped out and she grabbed me as the truck started, and this girl and old man drove away quickly. I really can't say what happened after that. I know my mom and dad calmed me down, and my dad and some uncles tried to follow the truck after my mom told everyone what happened. But nothing ever came of it. Nowadays, I'm always cautious of new places, and I'm always looking for an escape route just in case. I never get into cars with people I don't know. Looking back, maybe my 7-year-old brain just thought the girl looked like a little girl. Maybe she was just someone who aged really well, keeping her youth longer than others. Maybe she was just a young-looking woman. She was a bit taller than me. Why did the man not say anything? How did this girl get the tailgate closed so quickly and easily? Who knows if they would have been working together to take children? But I know without a doubt if my mom had not come looking for me, I would have been gone. The Haunted Villa. From Nina W. It was summer vacation. My family decided to book a villa, as they do every year. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2009, and my grandmother had just passed away from cancer. She had breast cancer, and she'd been fighting this illness for 2 years. She was such a strong and inspiring woman. I can still remember her strength in mind and spirit and confidence, and that she would survive this illness. Unfortunately, she passed away, leaving our family broken and torn apart. A few months after her death, my family decided it would be a great idea to once again go on a family vacation. When my grandmother was still alive, we'd book a villa somewhere isolated and spend an entire week with the family together, drinking, eating, taking long hikes through nearby woods. It was always great to be spending time together, making the family bond strong. Only, after the death of Granny, our family members rarely talked. Mobile phones were not common at the time, and Granny usually brought us all together when we'd visit her at her apartment. My brother and I didn't want to go at the beginning. We didn't want to spend time with our nieces and nephews who had never tried to get in touch with us anymore. Our parents changed our minds when they decided that we could choose the villa. My brother and I eagerly accepted the offer, and so we roamed the internet for hours until we found the perfect destination. It was a large 5-story house with a large garden that had a small pond, a decent-sized swimming pool, and a small forest at the edge of the garden. This house was old, built in the mid-1930s, and renovated and modernized a few times over the years. It had 6 bedrooms, 2 huge bathrooms, a large modern kitchen, a wine cellar, which had a big lock on it so I could never seem to open it. Downstairs had a dining room which had a large piano and a living room, which overlooked the beautiful square in which the house was situated. In the attic was a large playroom, which had a ping-pong table, a few game consoles, and a large dollhouse. This dollhouse was so large a grown man could easily fit in it. To be honest, it was everything a 9-year-old child could wish for. We'd be staying in the house with 12 people. My 3 nieces, Jisoo, Lori, and Dahlia, my nephew Peyton, my brother Ezra, my 2 aunts Jane and Nicole, my 2 uncles Frank and Peter, my parents, and the 2 dogs. Kiara was a black Labrador belonging to Jane, who's very territorial and can be aggressive if provoked, otherwise a sweetheart to those she trusts. The other dog, Chico, is Nicole's. Chico is a small black Russian terrier who was easily spooked and almost always aggressive. He'd almost always bark or growl, but would bite you if you came close to him. My aunt Nicole had found him when he was a little pup in the forest near her house. He'd been beaten and left by his original owners. Nicole took him to the vet and stayed with him until he was fully recovered. Chico became attached to her, and so she brought him home, much to Uncle Peter's dismay. Chico only trusts my aunt and will always stay by her side and protect her at all costs. Anyway, we arrived at the house early, and Peter called us, telling us they'd be running late because Chico had become ill on the road. My parents, along with Jane and Frank, decided it would be best that we get a drink at the restaurant while waiting for the others to arrive before entering the house. As we ordered something to drink, Jisoo, Dahlia, Ezra, and I pulled out our Nintendos and started playing Mario Kart. Our parents began chatting away with the bartender, talking about our plans for the upcoming week and the villa we would be spending our time in. As the bartender heard in which house we'd be staying in, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Are you folks sure about that? That house is believed to be haunted." Spooked at hearing this, I looked up from my game, falling far behind in the race. "Haunted?" I asked the man with a shaky voice. "Oh yeah, it's been haunted for years. This entire square has been, as a matter of fact. During World War II, the church you see in the middle of the square had been bombed. During the wartime, the folks that lived here decided it'd be best to build tunnels that would lead towards the church. When a warplane would be spotted, everyone would flee into the tunnels and seek shelter underneath the church. Little did they know that the church would fall victim to the bombing and would be coming down on their heads. It's said that almost all the people living on this square were killed. You can still see the damage on the church's roof if you look close enough." "How tragic," my Aunt Jane would mutter. I can still feel the cold shiver that had went down my spine when I heard that story. I'd always been a believer in the paranormal, but I'd never expected to actually visit a real haunted house. I could, however, see the excitement in my niece's eyes. When the other half of the family finally arrived, we went to the house. The house lived up to our expectations. It was grand and beautiful, with a wooden floor that would creak if you walked over it, a large staircase that had a hand railing which was decorated with small iron flowers, and huge chandeliers in every room, which would cast small rainbows on the walls. Jisoo, Dahlia, and I took off in a dash through the house, exploring every room, opening every door, and arguing who was getting which room. The rooms, however, were huge. None of them were particularly small, but some rooms had double beds, while others had bunk beds. Ezra didn't want to share a double bed with me, so we were left with the smallest room at the far end of the hallway, far away from the 2 bathrooms and the staircase that led up to the playroom. Our parents called us downstairs and told us they would be going to the store to buy some food for the coming week, and that Peyton would be in charge while we were gone. He was the eldest, after all. We agreed, and when our parents were gone, we took off in a mad dash up the stairs to the playroom in the attic. Ezra and Peyton started playing on the game consoles, while Jisoo, Dahlia, and Lori started playing ping pong. I went to play with the dollhouse. I was the youngest at the time, and a bit of a weirdo. I didn't always like playing with the others, as they would often ruin the stories I had in my head. So I climbed into the dollhouse and began playing with the dolls that were inside. I was so caught up in the story I was playing, I didn't even notice that the others had gone downstairs. I only really noticed when I heard Peyton and Lori's voices coming from underneath me. At that point, I crawled out of the dollhouse, searching for where the sound was coming from. There behind the dollhouse was a hole in the wood floor. The hole was big enough to fit my hands in, and it gave me a perfect visual of the room Peyton and Lori were in. They were unpacking their stuff. I wanted to shout at them and wave, but I chose not to. I didn't want to scare them. So instead, I went downstairs to unpack my own stuff. That evening, after we'd eaten dinner and watched a movie together, we all decided to go to bed early. We were all exhausted from the 3-hour drive it took to get here. However, that night around 2 a.m., we were awakened by Lori screaming her lungs out. When we all ran to her in Peyton's room, we found Lori crying in Peyton's arms. When Nicole asked what happened, Peyton told their mother that Lori claimed to have seen someone staring at them from a hole in the attic, the hole that I'd found. Lori, trembling, shook her head. "No, I didn't just see someone stare at us, I saw someone reach his or her hand through there." Lori then pointed at the hole in the ceiling with a shaky finger. "I woke up because I heard whispering. When I looked up, I saw someone's hand reaching through the hole." "Peter, Frank, please go look in the attic," Nicole asked politely of the men. My father and Jane went downstairs. That night, we searched the entire house and checked every door, but there was no one, and every door was locked up. It would have been impossible for anyone to get in. Lori and Peyton decided to sleep in the bedroom with their parents, and we all helped move their stuff. The next morning, I decided to go up to the attic to check if there truly was nothing up there. And there was nothing. No sign that someone else had been there. The dollhouse was even just as I'd left it the day before, and every doll still lay where I'd placed them. A little bit spooked, I went downstairs to eat breakfast with the other members of the family. Lori still seemed on edge, her skin as pale as a ghost, and her lips trembling as she ate her breakfast. That morning we went to the beach, and as we were walking on the sandy beach, Jisoo, Lori, Peyton, Ezra, Dahlia, and I started talking about the thing that happened last night. We decided that it would be a smart idea to stay up the coming night to catch the ghost in its act, and Scooby-Doo style reveal that it was just some simple person playing a prank on us. Naive, I know, but we were children back then, and this seemed like the best thing to do. That night we gathered all our snacks and drinks and snuck in the room of Jisoo and Dahlia. Our parents had told us not to stay up too late before heading to bed. We were left alone in the still, dark house while we made ourselves comfortable on the huge bed. The hours crept by while we started to talk about things that happened in our lives, such as the passing of our grandmother and the rift that had grown in our family. I remember feeling happy in that moment. Finally, we were all talking again as we'd done all those years before. We felt like a family once more, happy and close like it always been when Granny was here. Dahlia even started crying, and we hugged her tightly. After this heartwarming conversation, we all grew silent. We were tired. 3 hours had passed and nothing had happened yet. Ezra was growing impatient and eventually grew tired of waiting. He got out of bed and returned to his own room, telling us we could contact him through the Nintendo chat if something was happening, but that he was not going to waste any more time waiting for nothing. We agreed and started the chat up, making sure our chat function was working. Another half hour passed and Peyton and Lori decided to go to bed too. Only they didn't offer to stay in touch through the Nintendo. So it was only Jisoo, Dahlia, and I. We crawled underneath the blankets and began to draw things in the Nintendo chat box. We were having a great time. While we were drawing and whispering to each other, we heard the church bell ring 1 a.m. The loud sound of the single bell rang over the square, and a sudden silence fell over the buildings. I even noticed I'd laid my Nintendo down, and I was just holding my breath, listening. Suddenly, we heard the wooden floor above us squeak, as if someone was walking around in the attic. These footsteps sounded slow at first, which made me think it was just the house settling. But as we waited, the footsteps sounded quicker. "Do you guys hear that?" Jisoo asked softly, her voice startling me in the silence. Dahlia and I nodded, our faces only visible through the faint light the Nintendos were giving off. The footsteps continued, and suddenly we heard someone walking around down the stairs of the attic. The stairs were positioned on the other side of the door to the bedroom we were staying in. We held our breath as we listened. Then we could hear someone breathing. It sounded like they were panting, as if in a panic. "One of you send Ezra a message," Jisoo said, and I started typing as fast as I could, but my hands were trembling, and I had trouble holding the pen in my hands. The footsteps and the breathing continued in the hallway, right in front of the door of the bedroom. Dahlia grasped for air when she heard the thing outside the door brush against the door, and Jisoo and I hurriedly covered her mouth. "We need to hide," came the soft, melodic voice from right outside the door, the voice of a young woman. She sounded panicked, but there was a sweetness to her voice that made me forget my fear for a few seconds. But when the unseen person took another step, the fear and adrenaline came back. "We should hide." The voice spoke louder this time. We heard a soft bump against the door as if someone placed their hand on it. I felt a cold wave of fear run down my spine. I waited to hear the door finally open, but the sound never came. The footsteps became more distant, and we could hear someone walking towards the stairs that led to the hallway. "Come on!" Jisoo threw the blankets off and jumped out of the bed and towards the door of the bedroom. "We should follow it." "No!" Dahlia exclaimed, her voice muted. She sounded like she was about to cry. "We should stay here, or wake our parents. It could be dangerous." "Oh, come on, Dahlia. You always wanted to be a hero like Totally Spies, didn't you? This is your moment," said Jisoo. And those words did seem to encourage Dahlia. She stepped out of bed, hand in hand with me. Jisoo slowly opened the door, and we walked out of the room into the cold, empty hall. The only sources of light we had were the Nintendos in our hands. We could hear the footsteps downstairs, and a soft sound that was like someone crying. This made the hairs on my arms rise. We snuck down the stairs, then came into another cold hallway. "Hello?" Jisoo asked out loud. The crying then stopped, but we could still hear that breathing. It was coming from the dining room. We held each other tightly as we walked towards the door of the dining room, which we had left open. Suddenly, a dark figure ran past us, out of the dining room and into the kitchen. The sudden movement made us all jump, and Dahlia screamed loudly. We could hear a door being opened, and the footsteps continued into what surely must have been the wine cellar. "Guys, I want to go back," Dahlia said, crying, but Jisoo and I continued walking, too intrigued to stop now. I dragged Dahlia with me while we stepped into the kitchen. The door to the wine cellar was open, and the piercing cold and earthy smell that came from the cellar filled our noses as we approached the door. Jisoo was the first to enter, holding her Nintendo with shaking hands in front of her to lighten our path. The dark was so dense that she tripped down the last 2 steps and slammed her face hard on the ground. As she fell, her Nintendo went flying through the cellar and came to a stop at what should be a closed-off door, but that door was open too. The lock was broken and dangling down on the door. Standing in the now open doorway was a young woman. She was dressed in a flowery, light blue dress, which reached past her knees, and black shoes. She had blonde hair that was neatly tucked into a bun on the back of her head. Her skin was as pale as freshly fallen snow. She looked at us with frightful eyes, and she opened her mouth, saying again, "We should hide." She then turned and hurried down the long, dark tunnel. Dahlia and I quickly helped Jisoo up from the floor, and just as we began to turn towards the open door, all the lights in the house came on. Startled and blinded by the sudden light, we screamed and turned around. Our parents stood there behind us with concerned looks on their faces. They asked what in the world was going on, and we told them everything about the hole in the attic floor, the mysterious sounds, and the woman who led us here, and the open door into the tunnel. But when we turned to face the door in question, the door was closed. The lock was back on it, and there were no traces of that mysterious woman. Only the Nintendo lying on the ground, broken. We were scolded for going into the wine cellar alone, and the rest of the week we were not allowed to be up too late. We also weren't allowed to go anywhere in the house without supervision. The rest of the trip was nice, only every night around 1 a.m. we'd hear the whispers and the footsteps again, but we never went and followed the ghost like that one night. Who knows what would have happened to us, what we would have seen if we had followed her into that tunnel. Our parents never believed us, even when I recounted the story to them to this day, but I know what happened. I know what we saw. I remember all of what I am telling you. That villa was haunted. Something stared back. From Season. This isn't a particularly eventful story, but it is true, and still gives me the creeps to this day. I've always loved the water, the ocean in particular. Even after some of the strange and creepy things I've encountered, it still holds a special place in my heart. When I was around 15, my mom and I took a cruise down through the Caribbean, stopping at all the well-known destinations along the coast of Mexico and some of the smaller Central American countries. Our last stop before heading back to port was a tiny island off the coast of Honduras. We had decided to book what was supposed to be a relaxing snorkeling excursion. Sure, it wasn't the most famous for underwater activities, but there are some absolutely gorgeous reefs in the area, and I wanted to be a marine biologist at the time, so it was like heaven for me. We took a small ferry out from the main port to the island we would be spending the day on, and after lunch I was straight off to the water. I remember it was strange that day. It was beautiful out, sure, but there was almost no one else in that water. I think there was only one other person when I first got in, and I seem to remember noticing they'd left at some point while I was out, leaving the reef all to myself. Nonetheless, the water was like a dream. Not too hot, not too cold, tall shelves of reddish coral swarming with tropical fish. I don't know how long I spent just floating around, but it must have been hours. I at least know I came out looking like a freshly cooked lobster by the end. Anyway, I was floating on my stomach, facing directly below me, trying to identify any of the fish I could see, meaning I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. Suddenly, like someone had flipped a switch, the water got cold, and in the same instant, I found I had kicked my way over the drop-off point. The reef ended, and I could see the rocky outcrop sliding down into the nothingness below me. This may not seem scary to those who have not experienced it, or anything like it, but suddenly finding yourself suspended above a seemingly bottomless void, it causes a kind of primal terror in you. I froze up, suddenly feeling incredibly small, out of place. The silence of the water in my ears was deafening. As I stared down into the abyss, I felt a strong sense of vertigo, and just as I was regaining my senses and the ability to move, I saw it. Something shifted in the murky darkness below me. Something big, impossibly big. The last thing I remember seeing was a massive eye opening up, looking directly at me. Then, the next thing I knew, I was back on shore trying desperately to explain what had happened to my probably tipsy mom. When I got to the part about seeing something in the water below me, my voice caught. I could tell she was only half listening as it was, and I didn't want to make myself sound crazy by reporting some giant sea creature only a few 100 feet out. I never told anyone that part of my story, and to this day, I still wonder what it was I could have seen. Maybe it was some whale or other large creature that had drifted closer than usual to the shore. I know it's a cliché, but I know it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. Whatever it was, I was never able to bring myself to look over the deck of the ship at night, too scared I'd see something watching me from the darkness again. The Ghost on I-4 from TE-74. This happened to me about 23 years ago in Plant City, Florida. I was going through a rough time as I'd broken up with my fiancée for cheating on me, and I had moved in with my sister, her husband, and their 3 kids. I got a dishwashing job at a restaurant, and I moved up quickly to midday prep and dishwasher. I was making good money, about $13 an hour, which was great money for that time. Since my bad breakup with my ex-fiancée, I decided that I wanted an entry-level sports car, so I went to a local Mitsubishi dealer and got a 1993 3000 GT with low miles. This was a bit before the Fast and Furious, but needless to say, I'd put a couple of $1,000s into the wheels, speaker system, and engine. I could easily do 130 miles per hour quickly when I needed to. I managed to make a few friends at work, and we'd pile into my 3000 GT, going to the local party district to go clubbing. It was a Friday night at about 12:30 a.m. We all headed to a local party district to club called The Machine. We got to the club around 1 a.m. I had a few Crown and Cokes. After about an hour and a half of me striking out, trying to talk up a few women, I told the guys I was bored and a little tired, so I was going home. Oddly enough, all 4 coworkers had no problem with me leaving, so I asked the bartender for a Red Bull and a cup of fountain Coke. I quickly downed them both, then walked over to my 3000 GT in the parking tower. Fully awake now, I settled into my leather racing front bucket seat, turned the key, and my engine gurgled through the large racing dual exhaust system. I turned on my lights, shoved my stick shift into reverse, and soon I was blasting 9-inch nails while sitting at a red light before the interstate. Then an SUV with 3 very attractive girls pulled up next to me. This got my attention. The brunette, who was probably Latina and looked like a model, blew me a kiss and handed me her phone number through our open windows on a piece of a napkin. Maybe the night wasn't a waste after all, I thought. I quickly pulled over at a McDonald's and called the number on the napkin. The phone rang for about 6 times and I almost hung up, but a female answered laughing and giggling finally. "That was quick," she said. I laughed and agreed. I told her my name and she gave me hers, which was Zelda. We talked about 15 minutes. She said to call her back later around noon. I was pretty happy now as I hung up the phone and decided the night went pretty well. I threw my phone into the bucket seat beside me, and I turned up my system to keep me focused while driving. Quickly, I pulled onto the interstate and shifted the clutch into 5th gear. I was now cruising at about 85 miles per hour. My sister's place was about an hour's drive from the club, so I usually drove fast to get home, because I don't like coming home too late. I tended to wake up the kids and tee off my sister and her husband. Looking down at my watch, it read 3:10 a.m. I quickly looked back up at the interstate, trying to stay more focused. There were few cars on the interstate at this time, and that was fine by me as I could drive fast without having to worry about crashing into another car. Finally, I got to my favorite song on the CD and began drumming on the steering wheel. I looked back out onto the interstate and noticed the light poles became more spread out, and the woods were blurring by on both sides of the car. For reasons I still can't explain, my CD player skipped, causing my attention to focus on the car deck briefly, and then back up as I drove under an overpass. My eyes widened with terror as my eyes fell on this disheveled-looking old man standing in the middle of the interstate, staring at me. Now, you should understand I was driving at 85 miles per hour, and although I had sport car quality brakes, there was no way I could have stopped before hitting him. I locked up my brakes and my tires squealed ear-piercingly loud. Thick white smoke began to encircle my car. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, shaking. My eyes were locked on the spot where the old man had been, and my breathing was out of control. I peeled myself out of my car, and I began to look for the old man with my flashlight. I was sure that I'd hit him, that I'd killed this man. My mind was racing, my body still shivering. I continued to search for him, but I realized I'd better pull my car under the overpass so I didn't cause another accident. After a few more minutes of searching the area and the overpass itself, something dawned on me. I hadn't heard any smashing metal sounds. I hadn't seen any broken glass from my car. Certainly, hitting someone going that fast, my car would be a wreck. In my panic, I'd forgotten all about actually checking my car. I jogged fast back over to the front of my 3000 GT and began surveying the front of the car. Nothing. No blood, no damage, just nothing. It was now 3:33 a.m. as I checked my watch. An odd thing I noticed as well was that during all this time no other vehicles passed my way, either from my side or the other side of the interstate. I got back into my car, now wondering what had just happened. Did I see a road apparition? Since there was no blood or damage to my car, I didn't call the highway troopers as I didn't want to answer a bunch of questions about making a prank call. I shut my door, turned the key, and prepared to get back on the road again. As I began to pull out of the overpass, my headlights shone on the apparition again. It was him. He had this sad, lost look in his eyes. He was wearing a bucket hat, a white polo shirt, brown pants, and black slip-on shoes. He was waving at me, as if to say, "It's okay. Come on. It's safe to go out on the interstate." I was so scared that my foot instinctively began to press on the gas from sheer horror. However, before I floored it, I gazed quickly out of my driver's side mirror and stomped hard on the brakes. No sooner had I stopped when all of a sudden, almost out of nowhere, a speeding 18-wheeler flew by me and laid down on the loud truck horn as he did. My heart stopped, and I was frozen in place with terror. The 18-wheeler's red taillights faded fast over the hill in front of me. I got the courage to look back across the interstate overpass, searching for that old man. There was nothing now. Just an overpass, interstate pole light, and my car. I gathered my courage together and got back on the interstate safely, driving home and actually obeying the speed limit this time. It was 4:30 a.m. when I pulled into the driveway at my sister's. It was too late to go inside now, as I would definitely wake up the house. So I just turned everything off in my car, curled up, and went to sleep right there. The next thing I woke to was my sister knocking on my window telling me to pull my car out so her husband can get out. I groggily did, then walked like a zombie back into the house. She made some coffee and asked why I got back so late. I told her that she probably wouldn't believe me. She gave me the look, so I told her everything. My sister was a nurse in the local hospital ER, and she worked 6 nights on, 3 days off, 12-hour shifts. As I told her my story, she began to get whiter in her face, drinking less of her coffee. She waited until I finished and told me something chilling. A week ago, on her last night before her 3 days off, the paramedics brought in an elderly man suffering from Alzheimer's. He had wandered from his home that night and got hit by a car on the interstate. She said the paramedics told her that they picked him up at a certain mile marker. He got hit under overpass 333 on the interstate. That was the exact overpass that I'd seen the ghost at, and my watch had also read 3:33 a.m. She said he was pretty smashed up and died within a few hours. Just before he died, though, she said the oddest thing. She went back into his room to check on him, and he was awake. He had the saddest eyes, and he was waving at her to come over to him, she thought. But when she got there, his eyes were closed again, and he was unconscious. We both grabbed each other's hands and prayed at that moment. Shortly thereafter, I paid my car off, traded it in, and got an F-150. I met my future wife a few weeks later, and the rest is history, as they say. Looking back, though, had I not looked out my mirror before I jutted out onto the interstate that dark, lonely morning, I wonder if I would have been the next one, beckoning sadly to unsuspecting drivers, luring them to their doom under that overpass. The Beast at the Window. From Bill 6928. This happened a very long time ago. I'm 54 years old right now. I was 28 when this happened. It began when I was driving home from the north part of my state, trying to get down south back to my family. A 4 to 5 hour drive really was taking it out of me, and I needed to catch up on some sleep. I pulled over onto the side of the road. I'd barely seen any cars and figured a few hours of sleep wouldn't do any harm. Soon, I found myself dozing off to the quietness in the truck. I woke up around 3 a.m. Something had been hitting something in the nearby forest. It sounded like someone beating a steel bat against a tree. It really put me on edge, because I'd never heard any animals do such a thing. I'd hunted many times and I'd seen many animals. I tried going back to sleep, eventually waking up again only around an hour later to find something had hit my car door. I'd felt the entire car shake, and I nearly had a heart attack. Looking around to see what was there, I noticed foggy breathing, the type of thing that happens when it's cold and you can see your breath in the form of fog. This fog was rising every few seconds above my passenger window. It seemed as if someone, or something, was on the other side. Me being paranoid, I tried to lower myself down further into the seat. My body was now flattened on the seat, but I could see something looking in. I didn't know if it could see me, but it was drooling, whatever it was. What I was looking at appeared to be the head of a wolf. Its muzzle covered my window in a smudge of saliva. It pressed itself against the window hard. This animal was panting, as if it had run miles just to get to my car, and it appeared to be shaking, as if it was violently angry. Definitely not the scared kind of shaking, more the kind of I want to beat you to death shaking. I guess it hadn't seen me yet, because after long, it left. When it did, I got up, watched it walk into the woods, and became dumbfounded when I saw it walking on only 2 legs. These said legs were not the legs of a wolf nor a man. They were the legs of an elk or deer. Had it not been for the moonlight, I wouldn't have been able to see it at all. After the creature was gone, I sped off back home, shaking constantly the entire way. Back at home, I ran inside, locked the doors, and grabbed my .45 handgun, which was all I had at the time for protection. It's a very basic gun, but it would keep me safe. I hunkered down for the night, keeping my gun close to me. The next morning, I went down to my car and saw a huge dent in the side of it, like that thing had thrown a bowling ball at it with full force. My car door was totaled, and I couldn't open it with the handle on the passenger side. I don't know what that was, but I've learned to never go down that road again. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. The Black-Eyed Girl. From Anonymous. At the time of writing this, it was last week that I had a very strange encounter with the BEC, or Black-Eyed Children. It was super creepy to say the least. I lost sleep over it. Now, I may get scared easily, but this was the first time I felt actual fear for my life. I live on a dirt road with not too many houses nearby. I only have a few neighbors, and one of them has kids. It's a really quiet place for the most part, and I used to like that. But ever since this incident occurred, I've been more paranoid than I usually am. It began on one April night. It was pretty warm for a night in the beginning week of April. I live in the south, so it's nothing new. Anyway, it was around 12:40 a.m., and I'm awake, just checking out my YouTube page and watching random stuff. Out of nowhere, I hear my big dog, Bella, beginning to growl at the front door. I have 2 dogs, 3 indoor cats, and 1 outdoor cat. And if you ask me, animals seem to be more sensitive to paranormal stuff than humans are. Anyway, Bella's growling was really unusual. She's a very friendly lab mix and never growls. So I look up from my computer and I could have sworn I saw something through the glass border around my front door. I tried to tell Bella to hush, since the walls were paper thin, and if she started barking, she'd easily wake the rest of my family. Luckily, Bella did calm down when she heard my voice, but she stayed put at the front door anyway. I thought everything was okay after that, but 10 minutes later, not only was Bella growling again, but my cats were all staring at the front door, not blinking for even a second. It's like they were seeing something that I could not see. This time I got up from my bed, as my bed is in the living room for past medical reasons, and as I took a couple of steps to the door, I heard a light knocking sound. Bella started growling a little louder at this point, and I immediately felt on edge. There was something or someone on the other side of that door. At first I thought it was a burglar, but our doors are always unlocked, and if that were the case, they would just barge in immediately. I cautiously took a few more steps, and I stood beside Bella. I looked outside, and I saw what looked to be an 8-year-old little girl. She was really pale and wore something that looked to be a 1950s school uniform. But that wasn't the scariest part about her. When I looked closer at her face, her eyes were black. Every single bit of her eyes, solid black. I felt my heart beginning to pound faster as she knocked again. Since there are 2 doors at the front entrance, I opened the inside door and asked her what she was doing out so late. She didn't answer me, but instead asked me if she could come in. What scared me was the way she asked it. There was a level of confidence in her tone that shouldn't have been there. Normally, if you're a kid late at night wanting help, you'd be nervous, you'd be scared, and that would be reflected in your tone of voice. But this girl spoke with confidence. I just stared at her for a few seconds before she asked again. This time she said my first name, along with her question. I immediately locked the outside door and shut the inside door, locking it too before going to the door that led to the garage. As I was about to lock it, I heard her voice coming from the outside of the garage. She said, "Please let me in, miss. I won't hurt you." This scared the crap out of me so much that I froze. After a minute, which seemed like hours, I snapped out of my trance and locked the garage door. I then ran back to my bed, pulling the covers over myself like a frightened child. Still, I could hear her knocking every 5 seconds, asking to be let in. My cats were going nuts at this point, hissing at the doors. Bella was growling louder too. The animal's growling must have scared this little girl away, because I no longer heard her knocking anymore. Naturally, I didn't sleep at all that night, and I couldn't sleep much for the next few days either, only falling asleep for an hour before waking up in a panic. Whenever I did fall asleep for that 1 hour, I swear I could hear her voice calling my name, and I could see those black eyes of hers. It's been a week since this happened, and I haven't seen or heard from this strange girl again. I've read stories and knew enough to never let these children into your home. I'm glad I didn't. I have a feeling that if I did, I'd be locked in a mental hospital from going insane, or worse. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.